Tell you exactly what happened. And what happened was not democratic, it was not Christian, it was surely not kind. A whole series of nations were destroyed, almost utterly. Indigenous American nations, Federated nations, Cherokee nations, Algonquin nations, Crow, Blackfoot, all of these were nations, not tribes. It might have been tribes after these people got done killing them all. And this was the purpose to 1619, when they would bring about 20 Africans to Jamestown, Virginia, to begin what is documented as our formal induction into the American labor market. And we weren't the first slaves in America, or the second. They tried to enslave the indigenous Americans. They didn't succeed with him because he knew the forest, he knew the gully, he knew the riverbanks, he knew the area. He could slip away easily. They had more success enslaving their own whites. Read a book by Jerome Bennett called The Shaping of Black America. Read his first 2 chapters if you don't read nothing else. Read the first chapter called First Generation and the second chapter called White Servitude. How whites were indentured servants too. Not that it bothers me because I'm not concerned with what Europeans do to other Europeans. But finally they sold whites on the skin game. At first, poor whites had no vested interest in being against African people. They were poor. They were struggling. They were landless too. So what would have been their interest in being against Africans when some of them were indentured servants? Not slaves, but indentured servants. They even began to marry each other. But after they sold whites on the colored scheme, they forbid that kind of relationship one to the other and destroyed it about as ruthlessly as they destroyed the white and black Farmers Alliance. And ironically, the man who destroyed the white and black Farmers Alliance later helped to establish the Ku Klux Klan. But all of this is forgotten. All of this 19th century struggle with Douglass forgotten. The 19th century struggle in Africa when Africans did not negotiate a damn thing. They took their spears and their swords and their shields and went to the battlefield and negotiated in blood. Like real men. They announced their negotiation through their manhood. But at the end of the 19th century, missionary-trained Christian Africans, once again, in the Caribbean islands, Christian Africans here in the United States with their little punk brainwashed asses began the whole old track of appealing to the Christian conscience of people who weren't Christian in the first place. Now they would start the Pan-African Congress, started by a Caribbean lawyer, A. Sylvester Williams. There's a bit of irony that the 3 great Pan-Africanists all came from Trinidad. A. Sylvester Williams, C.L.R. James, and George Padmore. My father never knew A. Sylvester Williams. He did know James. They were brief friends and colleagues. And he knew George Padmore. He was friends with him in college, and he was also in Ghana with him in 1958. My father said he asked him a question, and he told him to stop meddling in his personal business. My father said he asked him, of all of you who are Pan-Africans wanting the unification of the African world, all three of you have had children by a black woman that you never married. None of you have established any long relationship with a black woman. Where is your Pan-Africanism when the door is closed and the lights are off? Man, stop meddling. My personal business is my personal business. My father said he left it at that. But it is a contradiction. But yet all three of these men made a major contribution, the most major contributions to the concept of the unification of African people. Du Bois, who never liked being called the father of Pan-Africanism because it wasn't true. Du Bois was the guardian of truth, and he wanted to be referred to as the guardian or the keeper of the Pan-African tradition. He never said he was the father or founder, and he wasn't, and he didn't pretend that he was. But his over-enthusiastic followers gave him credit for a lot of things he didn't do and failed to give him credit for a lot of things he did do. Intellectually, Du Bois was the finest example of a functioning intellect that we've produced in the whole of the Western world. The man was a genius, to say the least. But as we entered the 20th century, we entered the 20th century with a debate. The debate was over Pan-Africanism and nationalism. The debate was over something we haven't even settled today. What kind of education we need for tomorrow. What kind of education we need for our children. We were debating between Booker T. Washington's approach and Du Bois's approach. We were wrong then, and we are wrong now. Both Du Bois and Washington were right. One did not contradict the other. Both were speaking out of their respective environments and backgrounds. Booker T. Washington, born a slave, and from his background, he never met his father. He suspected his father was white because, you know, he was a little less than black, you know. Du Bois, a New England aristocrat, and you can be a New England aristocrat without having any money. Good family, good education, good manners, good friends, haven't disgraced yourself publicly or privately. You're an aristocrat. So he was accepted. Du Bois wanted to go to Harvard, as the young men of that town, the socialist town. Used to be whole socialist towns in America before the American media started telling people what to be afraid of. The education of the finest young men and women was taken care of by the town. And knowing that he had the high marks and being well thought of, Du Bois knew for sure he'd go to Harvard. They sent him to Fisk. And there he discovered who he was. White friend, Cuban girlfriend. Now he discovered there was a dividing line, and that he must enter race work. It was the best thing that could have happened to him. It shocked him out of his illusions, like moving to the South shocked me out of my illusions.